All right, let's get right into it. We're going to be exploring a really fascinating and, yeah, pretty provocative scientific idea. It's one that tries to connect psychedelic mushrooms with the very origins of, well, us. What makes us human?
I mean, that's the big question, right? Could a simple fungus, just growing out there in nature, have actually played a major role in shaping human consciousness, our culture, and our ability to cooperate? And look, I get it. It sounds a little out there at first, but this isn't just some fringe theory. This is the subject of a really detailed paper from a peer-reviewed journal, Frontiers in Psychology. And what it does is try to build a serious, evidence-based case for this very possibility. This quote right here really lays the groundwork for the whole thing. The authors are arguing that, based on where our ancestors were living and what they were eating, bumping into psilocybin mushrooms wasn't some kind of rare accident. No, it was pretty much an unavoidable part of their world. Now, this is absolutely crucial to understand. The paper isn't saying that mushrooms were some kind of magic bullet that, poof, instantly created the human mind. Not at all. The idea is that they acted as an enabling factor. Think of it more like a catalyst, something that could have sped up the cognitive and social changes that were already happening.
So let's tackle the first piece of this puzzle. Is this even plausible? I mean, how and why would our ancient ancestors have even found these mushrooms to begin with?
Well, this timeline shows you just how big the window of opportunity was. We're talking millions of years ago, when our early human ancestors, hominins, were spending more and more time on the ground looking for food. And once they started hunting and scavenging big animals, their world became even more connected with the exact places these fungi like to grow. So why was this encounter basically guaranteed? Well, think about it. Our ancestors were omnivores. They ate all sorts of things. These mushrooms were all over the place. And here's the kicker. A lot of these mushroom species grow on the dung of large animals, the very animals our ancestors were tracking, hunting, and scavenging for food. Okay, so they found the mushrooms, but why would they keep eating them? That question brings us to the neurochemical part of the argument, and this is really the core of the whole hypothesis. The easiest way to think about this is like a lock and a key. Your brain has all these little locks, we call them receptors, and they get opened by a very specific key, the neurotransmitter serotonin. It helps regulate things like your mood and stress levels. Well, it turns out that psilocybin, the stuff in the mushrooms, is a nearly identical key. It fits perfectly into a specific serotonin receptor, the 5-HT2A receptor, which is super important for how we learn and cope with stress. But that brings up a really interesting evolutionary question, doesn't it? If the brain already makes its own serotonin, why on earth would an outside substitute have been so valuable? And the paper suggests a pretty compelling answer. It might come down to their diet. See, to make that serotonin key, our bodies need something called tryptophan. But the diets of early hominins, well, they were often pretty low in tryptophan-rich foods. This could have created a kind of serotonin deficit, a biological problem that needed a solution. And psilocybin could have been that exact solution. Eating it would have given a direct chemical boost to a brain system that was stressed out and running low. So you see, this wasn't necessarily about getting high. It might have been a form of self-medication that gave them a real leg up, a real adaptive advantage by making them more resilient and mentally flexible. Okay, so now let's build on that. How do you get from these chemical effects in the brain to the incredibly complex social behaviors that define us as humans? Well, the paper argues that psilocybin could have been used for 4 key pro-social goals. First up, healing. By helping manage psychological stress and just improving a sense of well-being, psilocybin could have played a therapeutic role. And this is an idea that's actually backed up by a ton of modern clinical research showing how effective it can be for things like depression and anxiety. Second, bonding. We know the substance can make people feel more empathy, a sense of euphoria, and even playfulness. It also makes people more engaged with things like music and dance, all of which are totally fundamental for creating and strengthening social ties within a group. Third on the list is ritual. You can imagine that the shared, intense experience of a psychedelic state could be the perfect foundation for collective rituals. It creates this powerful sense of unity. Anthropologists actually have a word for it, communitas, and that's essential for passing down cultural beliefs and strengthening that group identity. And number 4, insight. By encouraging creative, outside-of-the-box thinking, psilocybin could have made group problem-solving and decision-making better. It might have even formed the basis for early shamanistic practices that were used for things like divination or planning. And what's so cool is that these aren't just wild guesses. This slide here shows that modern, controlled studies are actually confirming these pro-social effects today. We have research showing that psilocybin really does increase empathy. It decreases feelings of being disconnected from other people, and it can even lead to long-lasting positive changes in personality, like making people more open.
So we've got a plausible way they encountered them, a chemical mechanism in the brain, and documented pro-social effects. But the most powerful idea in this whole paper is how this all might have come together in a massive feedback loop that literally shaped our evolution. Now, to get this, we have to talk about something called niche construction. It's the idea that animals don't just passively adapt to their world, they actively change it. The classic example is a beaver building a dam. That dam totally changes the ecosystem, and that in turn creates new evolutionary pressures on the beaver's own kids and grandkids. The authors here are arguing humans did the same thing, but we did it with our social environment. And this model, straight from the paper, illustrates their idea perfectly. It shows how the regular use of psychedelics could have helped build what they call the socio-cognitive niche, that complex, cooperative, cultural world that is so uniquely human. And it's basically a two-part process. So over on the left side, you see the word instrumentalization. This is the direct effect. Eating the mushrooms enhanced the cognitive and social tools our ancestors were working with, making them more creative, more empathetic, better communicators, and more open to learning from each other. But then comes the real mind bender, the feedback loop on the right, niche construction. Because they had these enhanced abilities, our ancestors built a more complex social world, one filled with rituals and art and deeper forms of cooperation. And that new, more complex social world then became the main thing driving evolution. It started to favor individuals whose brains were biologically, genetically better suited for cooperation and symbolic thought, even without the mushroom. And this brings us to one last, really profound question that this work leaves us with. If this drive to connect with each other, to find meaning, and to just see the world differently was so important to our evolution, well, could it be that the desire to alter our consciousness isn't some kind of escape from being human, but is actually a fundamental part of what made us human in the first place?